Lila, a quiet girl with a mysterious past, finds herself in a family that promises healing but is tested by deep, unexpected challenges. Will the love and compassion she's found in her new home be enough to help her overcome the darkness that still haunts her? If Lila's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Epic Story Moments for more inspiring stories about love, family, and the power of compassion. Drop a comment below to tell us how you think unconditional love can change lives. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter to life. Emma and Charles live in a luxurious mansion in an upscale neighborhood, their lives seemingly perfect. Charles, a successful attorney, commands respect with his sharp intellect, while Emma, a renowned interior designer, is admired for her talent and charm. Their days are filled with lavish dinners, exotic vacations, and elegant parties, painting a picture of prosperity and prestige. Yet beneath this polished exterior lies a sense of emptiness. Charles immerses himself in his work, often using it as an excuse to avoid deeper conversations with Emma. She, in turn, finds herself yearning for something more meaningful, her passion for design no longer filling the growing void in her heart. Their marriage, once vibrant and full of connection, has settled into a predictable routine. One evening at a high-profile charity event, Emma listens to a speaker share heart-wrenching stories of underprivileged children. The tales strike a chord deep within her, stirring emotions she hasn't felt in years. As she watches videos of children facing unimaginable hardships, tears well up in her eyes. Charles, pragmatic and reserved, brushes off her emotions, labeling them as fleeting sentimentality. But for Emma, the moment lingers. The disparity between her comfortable life and the struggles of these children weighs on her. She begins to question the true value of her privileged existence, feeling an undeniable pull toward making a difference. Though Charles dismisses her concerns, Emma's heart whispers that something needs to change. In the dimly lit corner of a bustling city, a young black girl, Lila, sits on a weathered bench with her tattered backpack clutched tightly against her chest. The streets buzz with people rushing to their destinations, but no one stops to notice her. At just 10 years old, she has already endured more hardships than most face in a lifetime. Lila's life has been a series of relentless challenges. She lost her parents at a young age and has since been left to navigate a world that often feels cold and unkind. Nights are the hardest. She sleeps on park benches or in doorways, always alert, fearing for her safety. Her only belongings are the few items in her backpack: a worn-out blanket, a broken pencil, and a notebook filled with drawings and scribbled dreams of a better life. Hunger is her constant companion. Lila scavenges for food in trash bins behind restaurants, occasionally relying on the kindness of strangers who hand her leftovers. She's learned to endure the pangs of an empty stomach, but the ache of loneliness is harder to bear. Every passing family reminds her of what she's lost: a warm home, loving parents, and the security of knowing someone cares. School is a distant memory. Lila loved learning, especially drawing and reading, but homelessness has stolen that from her too. Without an address, enrolling in school became impossible, and her days are now spent wandering the streets, avoiding trouble, and hoping for a miracle. She carries her notebook everywhere, drawing pictures of houses, families, and a world where she feels safe. Despite her struggles, Lila's spirit remains resilient. She smiles at kind strangers and shares scraps of food with stray animals. Her eyes, though weary, sparkle with a glimmer of hope. She refuses to let the harshness of her reality extinguish her dreams, holding on to the belief that life can change for the better. As the evening settles, the city lights cast long shadows on Lila's small figure. She wraps herself in her frayed blanket, huddling against the cold. Above her, the stars twinkle faintly, as if silently promising her that brighter days lie ahead. But tonight, like so many before, she faces the world alone, unaware that her life is about to take an extraordinary turn. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the city streets into a blur of glistening lights and shimmering reflections. Charles tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his jaw set with irritation. "This is why I hate late meetings," he muttered, squinting through the windshield. Emma sat beside him, gazing absently out the passenger window, her mind lingering on the speaker's words from the charity event earlier that evening. As they turned down a quieter street, Emma's thoughts were interrupted by a faint silhouette in the downpour. At first, it was hard to make out. A small figure huddled on the curb, drenched and shivering. Her heart skipped a beat. "Charles, slow down," she said urgently, placing a hand on his arm. Charles glanced at her, confused, but obeyed. "What is it?" he asked, his tone edged with impatience. "There's someone sitting there," Emma said, pointing toward the figure. As they got closer, the headlights revealed a young girl, soaked to the skin, clutching a worn-out backpack. Her thin frame seemed even smaller under the weight of the rain, and she hugged her knees to her chest as if trying to disappear. "Poor thing," Emma whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Charles frowned. "It's late, Emma. She's probably just waiting for someone." Emma shook her head. "No one's coming for her. Look at her, she's alone." Against his better judgment, Charles pulled over. Emma rolled down her window slightly, rain splattering against the glass. "Sweetheart," she called gently, "are you okay?" The girl looked up, startled. Her wide, cautious eyes met Emma's, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Emma noticed how pale the girl's lips were, how her small hands trembled as she clutched her bag. "I'm fine," the girl said softly, though her voice betrayed her fear and exhaustion. "You're soaking wet," Emma pressed, her concern growing. "Where are your parents?" The girl hesitated before looking away, her silence speaking volumes. Emma's chest tightened as she realized the answer. She had no one. "Emma," Charles said quietly, we can't just leave her here," Emma interrupted, her tone firm. She turned back to the girl. "Come on, let us give you a ride. You'll catch your death out here." The girl hesitated, her eyes darting between Emma and Charles. She had learned to be wary of strangers, but something in Emma's voice, kind, motherly, insistent, made her nod slowly. Charles sighed heavily, knowing there was no use arguing. Emma opened the car door, stepping into the rain to help the girl in. As the girl climbed into the back seat, Emma draped her own scarf over her shoulders, offering a small measure of warmth. As Charles pulled back onto the road, Emma glanced at the girl in the rearview mirror. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked softly. "Lila," the girl replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma smiled, a warmth spreading in her chest despite the cold rain outside. She didn't know it yet, but this fleeting moment of kindness was about to change all their lives forever. The drive home was quiet, except for the rhythmic patter of rain on the car roof. Emma kept glancing at the rearview mirror, her eyes drawn to the small figure curled up in the back seat. Lila sat stiffly, clutching her soaked backpack, her wide eyes darting around nervously. She looked like a frightened kitten, lost and unsure of her safety. "Are you warm enough, sweetheart?" Emma asked, her voice gentle. Lila gave a small nod but said nothing. Her silence only deepened the ache in Emma's heart. It wasn't just pity she felt, it was something deeper, an almost maternal instinct she hadn't expected. Charles, however, was less moved. His fingers tapped against the steering wheel, his jaw set in a tight line. "We can't keep her, Emma," he said abruptly, his tone low but firm. Emma turned to him, her brow furrowing. "Who said anything about keeping her? She's just a child, Charles. She needed help, and we helped." Charles exhaled sharply, keeping his eyes on the road. "And what's the plan now? Drop her at a shelter? Call the police? This isn't a situation we can fix by bringing her home." The words stung Emma, but she tried to keep her composure. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I couldn't just leave her out there in the rain. Look at her." Charles risked a glance in the rearview mirror and immediately regretted it. Lila's small frame and the haunted look in her eyes tugged at something deep within him, but he pushed it down. "Emma, we don't even know her story," he argued, his voice softening slightly. "Exactly," Emma countered, her eyes bright with determination. "We don't know her story. Doesn't that bother you? What if she has no one? What if this is her life every single day?" Charles sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "We can't save everyone," he muttered, almost to himself. "No," Emma agreed, her voice quiet but resolute. "But we can save one." The weight of her words settled between them, the air in the car growing heavy with unspoken emotions. Lila shifted uncomfortably in the back seat, as though sensing the tension. Charles hesitated, glancing at Emma. He could see the fire in her eyes, the unshakable resolve that had always drawn him to her. She wasn't going to let this go, and deep down he knew she was right. But the practical part of him, his lawyer's mind, still wrestled with the implications. "We'll figure this out," Emma said softly, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was reassuring, grounding. Charles didn't respond, his thoughts a whirlwind of doubts and questions. Yet as they continued down the rain-soaked road, he couldn't help but glance back at Lila again. For all his hesitation, a small part of him wondered if this unexpected detour might lead to something more meaningful than either of them could imagine. The rain had stopped by the time Emma and Charles reached their mansion, but the tension in the car hadn't eased. Lila stepped hesitantly into the grand entryway, her small, muddy shoes leaving faint marks on the polished marble floor. She glanced around, awed and overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding her. Emma guided her gently to the living room, offering her a warm blanket and a mug of hot cocoa. "Make yourself comfortable," Emma said softly, sitting beside Lila on the plush sofa. Charles lingered near the doorway, his expression unreadable. He still wasn't sure about what they had done, and the questions swirling in his mind made him uneasy. "This is temporary, Emma," he reminded her, his voice steady but cautious. "We'll call social services in the morning." Emma shot him a look, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Charles, don't start." The night stretched into quiet conversations and soft reassurances as Emma coaxed bits of Lila's story from her. The girl's answers were guarded, her trust clearly worn thin by life's cruelties. She spoke of sleeping on streets, scavenging for food, and evading danger. The absence of any mention of family cut through Emma's heart like a knife. When Lila finally fell asleep on the couch, Emma turned to Charles with a resolute expression. "We can't just hand her over to a system that's already failed her." Charles rubbed his temples, the weight of her words heavy on his conscience. "Emma, this isn't just about us wanting to help. Adoption, especially someone so different from us, will invite scrutiny. People will talk. They'll question our motives. Do you know what that means for her? For us? I don't care what people say," Emma said fiercely. "What I care about is what's right for her. Look at her, Charles. She's a child who's been through unimaginable pain. She deserves more than this." Her words hung in the air, challenging him to respond. Charles sat heavily in the armchair across from her, his usually confident demeanor faltering. "Emma, adopting her won't just change her life. It'll change ours, everything we've worked for, everything we know." "Good," Emma said simply. "Because what we know hasn't been enough. Don't you feel it, Charles? The emptiness? The routines? We've spent years building a life, but what kind of life is it if we don't use it to help someone who truly needs it?" Charles looked at her, his resistance wavering. She was right. He felt it too, the hollowness of their so-called perfect life. Lila's presence, though unplanned, had already begun to shift something in him. After a long silence, Charles finally sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "This won't be easy, Emma. Not for us, and especially not for her." "I know," Emma said, her voice softening. "But it'll be worth it. For her and for us." As dawn broke, casting soft golden light across their living room, the decision was made. Despite the societal pushback they knew they'd face, despite the unknown challenges ahead, they chose to take a leap of faith. Lila would no longer be alone. Emma and Charles would adopt her, changing not just her life, but their own in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Emma and Charles quickly learned that deciding to adopt Lila was only the first step in a long and challenging journey. The adoption process was complex, laden with legal requirements, background checks, and an almost endless stream of paperwork. Each meeting with social workers and legal representatives brought new questions and hurdles. The first roadblock came when their social worker, Ms. Harper, visited their home to assess their suitability. She was polite but firm, her tone carrying the weight of skepticism. "You understand this isn't just about providing financial stability," she said, scanning their lavish home. "Lila will need emotional support, cultural understanding, and a commitment to addressing her trauma." Emma nodded confidently, but Charles felt a pang of self-doubt. Could they, as a wealthy white couple, truly understand and nurture a young black girl with such a different background? The challenges extended beyond the paperwork. While Emma poured her heart into learning about Lila's needs, reading books about adoption and cultural sensitivity, reaching out to support groups, and attending workshops, Charles struggled to find his footing. His work as a high-profile attorney left him little time to adjust, and he often felt out of place in conversations about parenting styles and emotional healing. Lila, too, had her own struggles. The transition from homelessness to living in a grand mansion was overwhelming. She found the house too big, too quiet, and too pristine. Every creak of the floorboards made her jump, and she was hesitant to touch anything, fearing she might break it. She kept her belongings in her backpack, refusing to unpack as if she were bracing for the day she'd be told to leave. Meal times were equally challenging. Lila, accustomed to scraps and small portions, would take only a few bites before pushing her plate away. Emma tried to coax her into eating more, but Lila's habits were deeply ingrained. One evening, Emma made spaghetti, hoping the familiar comfort food would help Lila relax. But when Lila spilled some sauce on the tablecloth, her face went pale with fear. "I'm sorry," Lila whispered, scrambling to clean it up. Emma knelt beside her, gently taking the napkin from her trembling hands. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said, her voice soothing. "It's just a tablecloth. You don't need to worry." Small moments like these revealed the depth of Lila's anxieties. Emma began to realize that providing love and care wasn't enough. She and Charles would need immense patience and understanding to help Lila heal. Outside the home, the couple faced a different kind of challenge: judgment. Friends, neighbors, and even extended family members offered unsolicited opinions, some well-meaning and others laced with thinly veiled prejudice. "Why didn't you adopt a child from your own community?" a distant relative asked during a family gathering. Emma's response was calm but firm. "Because every child deserves a loving home, no matter where they come from." Charles, less comfortable with confrontation, often found himself silent in these moments, unsure how to navigate the criticisms. His hesitation sometimes frustrated Emma, but she knew he was trying in his own way. Through it all, Emma's determination never wavered. She spent hours helping Lila settle in, from decorating her new room in cheerful colors to sitting with her during the night when she woke from nightmares. Slowly but surely, Lila began to open up. She started to leave her backpack on the floor instead of clutching it everywhere. She laughed softly at Emma's silly jokes and let herself enjoy playing with the golden retriever, Max. Charles, too, began to find his place. One evening, he came home early from work to find Lila struggling with a math problem at the dining table. He hesitated for a moment before pulling up a chair beside her. "Need some help?" he asked, his tone gentle. Lila looked at him, surprised, but nodded. As they worked through the problem together, Charles felt a small but significant connection form between them. The journey was far from easy, but with each passing day, Emma, Charles, and Lila began to adjust to their new reality. They were learning that family wasn't defined by blood or background but by love, commitment, and the willingness to grow together. The challenges were many, but so were the rewards, and their bond was slowly but surely taking root. Lila's transition into her new life with Emma and Charles was anything but smooth. For a girl who had known only the chaos of the streets, the structured and affluent world of her adoptive parents felt alien. The towering walls of their mansion, once a symbol of safety, often felt confining, as though she were trapped in a space too perfect to belong to. At first, Lila struggled to navigate the daily routines that Emma and Charles had lived by for years. Mornings were the hardest. Waking up in a bed with soft sheets and pillows seemed unnatural to her, and more than once, Emma found Lila curled up on the carpet beside the bed, clutching her old backpack like a lifeline. "Sweetheart," Emma said one morning, kneeling beside her. "The bed is yours. You don't have to sleep on the floor anymore." Lila looked away, her voice barely audible. "I don't want to mess it up." Emma's heart broke a little more each time she saw how deeply ingrained Lila's fear of being a burden was. She tried to ease her into the idea that this home was her home now, but progress was slow. The dining table posed its own challenges. Emma and Charles were used to elaborate meals served by their housekeeper, Mrs. Greenwood, but Lila wasn't. She barely ate, her hunger dulled by years of scarcity training her to ration every bite. When served a beautifully plated dish, she would pick at it, her eyes darting nervously as though someone might snatch it away. "Is it not good?" Emma asked gently one evening, watching Lila push her peas around her plate. Lila shook her head quickly. "It's good. I'm not that hungry." Emma exchanged a glance with Charles, who frowned but said nothing. They both knew it wasn't about the food, it was about trust, and trust would take time. School presented yet another hurdle. Enrolled in a prestigious private academy, Lila was thrust into a world of polished uniforms, structured schedules, and classmates who seemed to have everything she lacked. Her peers weren't unkind, but their curiosity often made her feel like an outsider. "Is it true you didn't have a home before?" one girl asked during lunch, her tone more curious than cruel. Lila nodded hesitantly, wishing she could disappear. "That's so sad," another said, though her words carried an air of pity that made Lila's stomach churn. The comments stuck with her, making her reluctant to open up or engage. Teachers noticed her withdrawn behavior and informed Emma and Charles during parent-teacher meetings. "She's bright," her homeroom teacher said, "but she's holding back. It's like she doesn't believe she belongs here." Emma took this to heart, spending evenings helping Lila with her homework and encouraging her to share her feelings. Charles, though less vocal, showed his support by attending school events, his presence a quiet but steady reassurance to Lila. Despite their efforts, Lila's struggles persisted. Nightmares often woke her in the middle of the night, memories of cold pavements and growling stomachs haunting her even in her new, warm bed. Emma would sit with her during these moments, holding her until the fear subsided. "I'm here," Emma would whisper. "We're not going anywhere." Slowly, Lila began to test the boundaries of her new life. She started unpacking her backpack, placing a few personal items on the shelves in her room. She played fetch with Max in the sprawling backyard, her laughter breaking through her guarded exterior. She even began helping Mrs. Greenwood in the kitchen, surprising the housekeeper with her eagerness to learn. "She's a quick study," Mrs. Greenwood told Emma one day, her tone warm. "And she's got a knack for seasoning, better than Mr. Charles, I'd say." Small victories like these hinted at Lila's gradual adaptation, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Every step forward seemed to come with an equal step back. Trust was building, but it was fragile, and Lila's past cast a long shadow over her present. Emma and Charles remained patient, determined to give Lila the time and space she needed to heal. Though the challenges were many, their commitment to Lila only deepened as they began to see glimpses of the remarkable young girl she was becoming. Emma approached her relationship with Lila with tenderness and patience, fully aware that their bond would not be built overnight. She recognized that years of neglect and hardship had left Lila wary of trusting anyone, let alone embracing the idea of a mother figure. But Emma was determined, taking small, deliberate steps to break down the walls Lila had built around her heart. It began with simple, quiet moments. Emma made it a point to sit with Lila every morning over breakfast. While Charles hurried through his meal, often preoccupied with his work emails, Emma slowed the pace of her day, focusing entirely on Lila. "Do you like scrambled eggs?" Emma asked one morning, noting that Lila had barely touched her plate. Lila shrugged. "I guess. I'm not used to this much food." Emma softened. "How about we try something else tomorrow? Pancakes, maybe? You can help me make them?" Lila's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she nodded. True to her word, Emma involved Lila in the kitchen the next day, guiding her through the steps of mixing batter and flipping pancakes. For the first time, Lila seemed to relax, her guarded demeanor melting as she giggled at Emma's exaggerated attempts to flip the perfect pancake. "I think you're better at this than I am," Emma admitted, handing Lila the spatula. The simple act of working side by side began to bridge the gap between them. Emma noticed that Lila smiled a little more after that morning, her laughter coming easier with each shared activity. In the afternoons, Emma would invite Lila to join her in the garden, where they planted flowers and herbs. "This is lavender," Emma explained, handing Lila a small sprout. "It's calming. Smell it." Lila inhaled the scent, her expression thoughtful. "It's nice," she said quietly. Emma nodded. "Whenever you feel nervous or scared, you can rub the leaves and smell it. It helps." Lila started to spend more time in the garden, tending to her own little corner where she planted daisies and marigolds. Emma noticed that these moments in nature seemed to ease Lila's anxiety, giving her a sense of purpose and peace. Bedtime became another opportunity for bonding. Lila, still plagued by nightmares, often resisted going to sleep. Emma decided to implement a nightly ritual, sitting by Lila's bedside with a book. "How about a story?" she'd ask, holding up a classic novel or a whimsical children's tale. At first, Lila was hesitant, but she gradually began to enjoy these moments. Emma's soothing voice and the comforting presence of Max, the family dog, curled up at the foot of the bed, made Lila feel safe enough to drift off. One night, as Emma closed the book after finishing a chapter, Lila surprised her by speaking up. "Did your mom read to you too?" Emma smiled, her heart swelling at Lila's question. "She did. Every night. It made me feel like I was never alone." Lila looked thoughtful. "I like it when you read," she admitted softly. Emma reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind Lila's ear. "Then I'll read to you every night as long as you want." Their bond deepened further during moments of vulnerability. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at school, Lila came home unusually quiet. Emma gave her space but kept an eye on her, sensing that something was wrong. Later, as they sat together in the living room, Emma gently broached the topic. "Rough day?" Lila nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "The other kids, they said I don't belong there." Emma's heart broke at the pain in Lila's voice. She scooted closer, wrapping an arm around Lila's shoulders. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Kids can be cruel sometimes, but what they say doesn't define you. You belong wherever you want to be." Lila leaned into Emma's embrace, her defenses lowering. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry openly, letting out years of pent-up hurt and frustration. Emma held her tightly, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. From that night on, Lila seemed to trust Emma more deeply. She began to share bits of her past, her voice hesitant but growing stronger with each story. Emma listened without judgment, offering only empathy and understanding. These shared moments forged a bond that Lila had never experienced before, a bond rooted in unconditional love and security. Emma became not just a guardian, but a mother figure, teaching Lila that it was safe to trust again. Though the journey was far from over, Emma's unwavering patience and compassion laid the foundation for a relationship that would change both their lives forever. Charles sat in his favorite armchair, the one by the window where the light always hit just right, his fingers absently tapping the newspaper in front of him. It had been weeks since Lila had come into their lives, and yet, the knot in his chest hadn't loosened. The awkward silences, the fleeting glances, the uncertainty in her eyes. It was all still there. Despite the dinners, the outings, the daily routines, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was failing her. He sighed, rubbing his face, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. The idea of adopting Lila had seemed so right in theory. A child in need of a family in need of a child. But theory was a poor substitute for reality. Lila had been with them long enough to prove that she wasn't like their own children, at least not in the ways that mattered most to Charles. His biological kids had been easy. Laughing, sharing stories, fighting like siblings, their connection felt instinctual. But with Lila, there was an invisible wall between them. Her quietness, her wariness, the way she still seemed like a guest in their home, unsettled him. He knew it wasn't fair. She hadn't had the same upbringing, the same opportunities, but there was a distance, something intangible, that he couldn't seem to cross. As he shifted in the chair, he glanced over at her sitting at the kitchen table. She was working on a project for school, her brow furrowed in concentration. The silence between them was almost palpable. Charles cleared his throat, trying to find the words. "Need any help with that?" he asked, his voice a little more tentative than he intended. Lila looked up, her eyes flicking over him quickly before returning to her assignment. "No, I've got it," she replied, her voice soft but firm, the kind of tone that suggested she didn't want to be bothered. He nodded, trying not to show how much that stung. But instead of retreating into his own world, he watched her for a moment longer. There was something about the way she focused, how determined she seemed, that pulled at him. She wasn't giving up. She wasn't letting the world define her, despite how broken it had been for her. That was when it hit him. He had been trying to fix things, trying to force her to fit into the life they'd built, instead of seeing her for who she was. The thought lingered in his mind for a few days, nudging him every time he saw her try and fail or succeed on her own without asking for help. He hadn't really thought about how she must have felt being uprooted, losing everything she knew, and trying to find a place in a family that wasn't hers. The following Saturday morning after breakfast, he found himself standing at the kitchen counter, staring at the cereal box in front of him. He didn't know why, but today felt different. Maybe it was the way the sunlight filtered through the window, or the soft hum of life around him, but something pushed him forward. He set the box down and walked over to where Lila was again bent over her project. "I was thinking," he began, his voice uncertain, "maybe I could help you with that after all. Know a thing or two about this kind of stuff?" Lila glanced up at him, her eyes wide and guarded. For a long beat, she didn't say anything, just stared at him like she was trying to decide if he was serious. Charles felt his heart race a little under the scrutiny. But then, slowly she nodded. "Okay," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. They sat together for the next hour. It wasn't smooth at first. Charles found himself fumbling through his words, unsure of how to speak to her in a way that didn't feel like an interrogation. He wanted to reach out to her, but there was still a certain tension in the air between them. Yet, with every question he asked about the project, every suggestion he made, it felt like the space between them started to shrink, if only a little. Lila began to relax, letting him guide her through parts of the assignment that had stumped her. By the time they were finished, something had shifted. Lila didn't just look at him like he was a stranger. There was a small, shy smile playing at the corner of her lips, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Charles felt like he'd been allowed into her world, even just for a moment. The next few days were quieter than usual, but in a way that made him realize how much had changed. Lila was still quiet, still reserved, but she started to initiate small conversations with him. It was nothing big, asking about his day, telling him about her favorite parts of a book she was reading, but the ice between them had broken just enough for him to see her in a new light. He wasn't her savior, and she wasn't some puzzle to be solved. She was a kid who had lived through things he couldn't imagine, but who was still capable of connection. One evening, while they were having dinner, Lila did something unexpected. She passed him a plate of food, looked him square in the eye, and said, "Thanks for helping me with the project the other day." "I appreciate it." Charles felt something in his chest loosen at the words, at the sincerity in her voice. He hadn't known he needed that acknowledgement, but hearing it from her, he hadn't realized how much he had been holding on to that need. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Later that night, as he was about to turn off the lights in the living room, he caught a glimpse of Lila standing in the hallway. She was looking at a family photo they'd taken on their first day together, her face soft and contemplative. He stood still for a moment, watching her, realizing that he hadn't been the only one changing. Maybe, just maybe, they were both learning to be part of this family in ways they hadn't expected. Lila had always been quiet, a reserved figure in the background of their bustling home. At first, Charles and Claire had assumed she simply needed time to adjust, but as weeks passed, they realized that she wasn't just shy, she was a mystery. She moved through their daily lives with a kind of quiet grace, rarely speaking unless spoken to, never really drawing attention to herself. Yet, there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, that hinted at something more, something hidden beneath her calm exterior. It was a Tuesday evening when it first happened. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through some work emails, when she heard the sound of Lila's voice. It was soft at first, just a hum, a melody that seemed to rise from nowhere, filling the space between the clinking of dishes and the hum of the refrigerator. Curious, Claire followed the sound, stepping into the living room, where Lila was standing by the window, her back to Claire. She was holding a guitar, an old acoustic model that had been passed down from Claire's grandfather, an item they'd kept more out of sentiment than expectation. Lila was gently strumming, her fingers moving with an ease that Claire had never anticipated. The melody was sweet, delicate, and completely unexpected. It wasn't just a random tune, it was a song, a well-crafted piece that hinted at depth and experience beyond her years. Claire stood frozen for a moment, caught off guard by the raw emotion that poured from the music. She hadn't known Lila played the guitar, much less that she was so talented. The quiet, introverted girl they'd been trying to get to know was suddenly someone entirely new. When the last note drifted off, Lila turned, her face flushed with surprise, as if she hadn't realized Claire was there. Her eyes widened, and she immediately dropped the guitar to her side, a deep blush creeping across her cheeks. I'm sorry, Lila stammered, clearly embarrassed. I didn't mean to. Lila, that was beautiful, Claire interrupted, her voice gentle, but full of admiration. I didn't know you played. Lila hesitated, then shrugged, still looking anywhere but at Claire. I taught myself a while ago. I don't play much. Not anymore. But Claire could see it now, the way Lila's hands lingered over the guitar, like it was a part of her. She hadn't just learned to play, she had developed a connection with the instrument that spoke of years of practice and passion. There was something deep within her that wanted to be expressed, and the guitar was her outlet. The next evening after dinner, Claire and Charles sat together on the couch. Claire was turning the idea over in her head, unable to shake the surprise from her mind. She glanced over at Charles, who was flipping through a magazine, clearly distracted. I heard Lila playing the guitar last night, she said slowly. Charles looked up, intrigued. Really? I didn't know she played. She's amazing, Claire said, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She's been hiding it, but there's so much talent in her. Charles raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. I didn't think she'd be the type. That's the thing, Claire replied, her voice thoughtful. There's so much more to her than we've been seeing. We've barely scratched the surface. They both fell into a quiet contemplation, the idea of Lila's hidden talent lingering in the air. They had always assumed that Lila's quiet demeanor meant she was still adjusting, that she hadn't quite found her place. But now, it seemed there was a depth to her that neither of them had anticipated. The next few days felt different. Charles and Claire began to see Lila in a new light, noticing the little things she did. Her quiet focus when she painted in the corner of the living room, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about books she loved, or the way she lost herself in writing poems that she never shared. These were the glimpses of the real Lila, the girl who had been so carefully hidden beneath a veil of uncertainty. Charles decided to take a more direct approach, wanting to show Lila that he was open to her talents, that he wanted to know who she truly was. One evening after dinner, he found her sitting in the corner of the living room, guitar in hand again. He hesitated at the door, watching her strum softly. You know, he began, his voice warm, I used to play a little myself when I was younger. Not as well as you, but enough to appreciate a good tune. Lila didn't look up, but she didn't stop playing either. I don't really play in front of people. I'm not that good. I don't believe that, Charles said with a chuckle, stepping into the room and taking his seat on the couch. I've heard you. You've got something there. Lila's hands faltered slightly on the strings. I don't know. It's just something I do when I need to think. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. Charles smiled, the gesture warm but understanding. It's not about making a big deal out of it, Lila. It's about sharing something that matters to you. She was quiet for a moment, then slowly she began to play again, this time with a little more confidence. Charles leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over him. It wasn't just the notes that moved him, it was the emotion behind them. The way each chord seemed to tell a story, each strum carrying a piece of Lila's soul. As the song ended, Lila finally met his eyes, her expression vulnerable. I used to write songs too, she admitted softly. But I never finished them. I'm not sure if they're good enough. Lila, Charles said gently, it's not about being good enough. It's about what feels real. And that, he gestured to the guitar, that's real. A small, shy smile tugged at the corner of Lila's lips, her eyes softening. From that moment on, things began to shift between them. The guitar, which had once been a source of embarrassment, became a bridge between Lila and her new family. She started to play more often, and eventually, she even shared some of her songs with Claire and Charles, who both encouraged her to keep going. They listened intently, never judging, always supportive, and Lila, slowly but surely, began to believe in herself a little more. The couple had underestimated her. What they hadn't realized was that beneath her quiet exterior was a girl brimming with hidden talents and a world of stories waiting to be shared. Lila had always felt like an outsider at school, but over the past few weeks, things had gotten worse. It started with small, whispered comments in the hallways, jokes she didn't quite understand, looks that lingered a bit too long. She brushed it off at first. Maybe they were just being careless. Maybe it was nothing. But when her classmates began to openly snicker when she entered the room, Lila felt the sting in her chest. She tried to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't happening, but the whispers turned into something more malicious. One afternoon, as Lila sat alone in the cafeteria, a group of girls approached her table. They had always been the popular crowd, the kind of girls who always seemed to have the most attention, the ones everyone else quietly admired or feared. Lila had never been part of their group, and she didn't care to be. But today, it seemed they had singled her out. "Is it true?" one of the girls, Tara, asked, her tone laced with mock curiosity. Lila looked up, confused. "Is what true?" Tara leaned in, her lips curling into a grin. "That you're adopted. You know, one of those charity cases. You must be really lucky that they picked you, huh?" Lila's face flushed hot, but she remained silent. The girl's words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. "Doesn't it bother you?" Tara continued, her voice louder now, drawing the attention of the nearby students. "That they only took you in because they felt sorry for you? I mean, you're not even like them, are you? You're just different." The laughter from the others around her stung, like a physical blow. Lila's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to hold back the tears. She couldn't speak, couldn't even look up from her tray. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but the words were trapped in her throat. She had been used to feeling out of place, but this was different. This wasn't just being ignored or kept at a distance. This was open, cruel rejection. And it hurt in a way she hadn't expected. As the group moved away, still laughing and whispering, Lila stayed frozen at the table. She could feel the weight of the room's eyes on her, the pity, the judgment. It was as if she were invisible, and yet everyone could see her pain, her insecurity, her difference. By the time she got home that evening, she was exhausted, emotionally drained. She barely managed to smile when she walked through the door, not wanting to burden Claire and Charles with her day. But it didn't go unnoticed. "Lila," Claire said softly from the living room, noticing the distant look on her face. "Are you okay?" Lila nodded quickly, not trusting herself to speak. But her silence only made Claire's concern deepen. She stood and walked over to Lila, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Lila," Claire repeated, her voice gentle but insistent, "I know something's wrong. You don't have to carry it alone." Lila's defenses crumbled in that moment, and she found herself unable to hold back any longer. The tears she had been holding in all day started to fall freely as she sat down on the couch, the weight of everything hitting her at once. "I can't do this anymore," she choked out between sobs. "They don't want me there. They make fun of me. They say I don't belong." Charles appeared at the doorway, his face softening as he saw Lila's distress. He didn't need to ask what had happened, he could see it in her eyes. He walked over and knelt beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. "You don't have to go through this alone, Lila," he said quietly. "We're with you no matter what. But you don't have to stay quiet about it either. You can talk to us, and we'll help you figure this out." Lila looked at her new family, the people who had taken her in, and for the first time since the bullying had started, she allowed herself to feel truly seen. In their eyes, she wasn't an outsider. She was part of them. She wasn't just tolerated, she was loved. But even with their support, Lila still felt small and insignificant, like the bullying was something that couldn't be undone. The next day at school, she walked into the hall with a sense of dread. Her classmates' stares burned into her, and she could hear the faint whispers again as she passed. The weight of their judgments was almost unbearable, but she knew she couldn't hide forever. She had to face them. At lunch, when Tara and her friends appeared at the cafeteria door, Lila felt a rush of fear. They were looking for someone to target today, and it was obvious that she was the one they had chosen. They circled around her table like vultures, laughing under their breath, waiting for her to shrink back, for her to retreat into herself again. But something inside Lila had changed. She couldn't explain it, but the warmth of her family's love, the support they had given her, started to build something strong within her. It was as if all the strength she needed was already inside her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And in that moment, when Tara leaned in and opened her mouth to make another cruel comment, Lila finally found her voice. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I'm not going to let you talk to me like that anymore." The words were simple, but they felt like a declaration. Tara blinked, clearly taken aback by the unexpected response. The group behind her fell silent for a moment. Lila continued, her voice gaining confidence with each word. "You don't know me, and you don't get to decide who I am." Lila stood, her hands trembling at her sides, but her head held high. For the first time, she felt the power of her own voice. "I may be different from you," she said, her voice ringing out with unexpected strength. "But that doesn't mean I'm less than you." The room seemed to hold its breath for a moment. The group of girls stared at her in stunned silence, not sure how to react. And then, Tara scoffed, her expression shifting back to its usual smugness. "Oh, please," she sneered, "like anyone cares what you think?" But Lila didn't care about Tara's words anymore. She didn't need her approval, and she certainly didn't need her bullying. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, and the girls scattered, leaving Lila standing there, her heart still racing but her chest swelling with a new sense of pride. She had done it. She had faced them and taken back her power. By the time she walked home that day, she felt a quiet sense of triumph. The bullying hadn't magically stopped, but something inside her had shifted. She knew now that she wasn't powerless. She wasn't alone. And most importantly, she wasn't going to let the cruelty of others define who she was ever again. When she walked through the door that afternoon, Claire and Charles were waiting for her. Lila didn't have to say a word. They could see it in her eyes. Something had changed. She had found her strength. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what the world threw at her, she had a family who would always stand by her side. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions for Lila. After that first moment of standing up for herself at school, things didn't change overnight. The whispers and stares persisted, the cruel jokes from her classmates only growing louder as time passed. Lila did her best to ignore it, to keep her head down, but the weight of it was suffocating. It wasn't just the comments anymore. It was the feeling of being invisible, of always being the target. She had fought back, but the battle felt endless. One evening, as she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror, she felt the familiar ache of loneliness creep in. She wanted to talk to someone, wanted to share how much it hurt, but she was scared of burdening Claire and Charles. They had already done so much for her, and she didn't want to add to their worries. But Charles must have sensed her turmoil. He had a way of reading her that no one else did, a quiet understanding that came from months of growing close as a family. That night, after dinner, he asked if they could talk. Lila hesitated but followed him to the living room, where Claire was already waiting. "Lila," Claire said gently, her eyes soft with concern, "we need to know what's going on at school. We can't help if you don't let us in." Lila swallowed hard, the weight of her emotions threatening to spill over. She wanted to tell them everything, to let them see the hurt she had been hiding, but it was hard. She had always been so used to keeping things inside, to facing everything on her own. But here, with Claire and Charles, she knew she didn't have to do that anymore. Lila started, but her voice faltered. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering the courage to speak. They keep making fun of me. They say things about me, about how I don't belong, how I'm different. It's been hard, and I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to make it worse." Claire's heart broke as she reached over and gently took Lila's hand. "Sweetheart, we want to help. You don't have to protect us from this. We're your family now, and we're in this together." Charles nodded, his voice firm and filled with conviction. "No one gets to treat you that way, Lila. Not now, not ever. We're going to make sure you feel safe and supported." "You're not alone in this. Do you understand?" Lila's eyes welled up with tears at their words. She had never heard anyone speak with such certainty, with such fierce protection. But deep down she knew they meant it. This wasn't just empty reassurance, this was a promise. The next morning, Charles and Claire went to the school to meet with the principal. They weren't going to let their daughter face this alone any longer. They knew Lila had been strong, standing up for herself in front of her peers, but it was time for them to step in and ensure she was truly protected. When they walked into the principal's office, Claire felt a surge of both determination and protectiveness. This wasn't just about Lila anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, about making sure she never had to walk through those school doors feeling like an outsider. "Thank you for seeing us today," Charles began, his voice calm but unwavering. "We're here to talk about some ongoing issues our daughter has been facing. We've heard reports of bullying, and we're concerned it's not being addressed properly." The principal, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked at them with a mixture of surprise and unease. "I'm sorry to hear that. I was unaware of the extent of the situation. But I assure you, we take bullying very seriously here. We've been hearing for weeks that our daughter is being targeted, made to feel like she doesn't belong," Claire said, her voice growing more firm. "We want you to take action. No child should have to endure that, and we won't stand by while our daughter is hurt." The principal nodded, her expression turning more serious. "I understand, and we'll investigate this further. But I'd like to hear from Lila herself. Perhaps we can schedule a time for her to come in and talk about her experience." Charles and Claire exchanged a look. They didn't want Lila to feel like she had to relive the pain, but they also understood that the school needed to know exactly what was happening. "We'll talk to Lila and see if she's comfortable with that," Charles said. "But in the meantime, we want to ensure that something is done. These issues need to be addressed immediately. We'll have a meeting with the teachers, the school counselor, and the students involved," the principal assured them. "I'll take responsibility for making sure that this stops." Once they left the school, Claire and Charles took Lila out for ice cream. The drive was quiet, and Lila could feel the tension in the air. She had never expected her parents to go to the school, and part of her felt guilty for not handling it herself. But as they sat in the ice cream parlor, with Charles and Claire smiling at her and offering words of encouragement, Lila realized that their support didn't come with conditions. They loved her and they would always have her back, no matter what. When they returned home that night, Lila was still processing everything that had happened. She had felt a sense of relief when Claire and Charles spoke up, but now she was filled with a new kind of uncertainty. What if the bullying didn't stop? What if the kids at school didn't take them seriously? What if things only got worse? But as she walked into the house, she saw Claire and Charles sitting together on the couch, waiting for her. They had been through so much with her, had seen the good, the bad, and the painful, and yet they never wavered in their love. "Lila," Claire said softly, "we've got your back always. And we're going to make sure you know that. This is your fight too, but you don't have to fight alone." Charles nodded in agreement, his voice warm. "You've already shown incredible strength, Lila. But now, we're going to make sure the world sees it too. You are our daughter and no one will make you feel less than that." Tears welled up in Lila's eyes again, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. She had never felt so supported, so cherished. She had always feared being abandoned, rejected, but now, she knew she had a family who would fight for her, who would stand by her side no matter what. And for the first time in a long while, Lila felt like she belonged. In the weeks that followed, Lila's life began to change in ways she hadn't expected. The bullying at school, though painful, had brought with it a shift. With the full support of her parents, and the school now taking stronger action, the taunts began to quiet. But more than that, Lila found herself stepping into a role she had never imagined, one of strength, not just for herself, but for others around her. The first real sign of change came one afternoon when Lila was walking to her locker. As usual, she kept her head down, focusing on her books, but this time, there was a subtle difference in the way the other students looked at her. No longer did they eye her with suspicion or judgment. Instead, some of them smiled, offering her a brief nod or a word of encouragement. Lila wasn't sure what had shifted, but it felt like a weight had been lifted. It wasn't just her classmates who noticed her transformation, even her teachers began to see something new in her. Lila had always been intelligent, but now, she spoke up more in class, her voice steady and confident, her answers insightful. One teacher, Ms. Campbell, took notice of Lila's newfound courage and asked her to stay after class one day. "Lila, I've seen a lot of growth in you recently," Ms. Campbell said with a warm smile. "It's clear you've been through a lot, but your ability to persevere and still show up every day is remarkable. I think your story could really help others." Lila was taken aback. "What do you mean?" Ms. Campbell explained that the school was planning a community event to raise awareness about bullying and how to support students who face discrimination. "I think your experience could inspire others," she suggested. "Would you be willing to speak about it? You don't have to do it alone. You'd have support." At first, Lila balked at the idea. She wasn't sure if she was ready to open up, to relive the painful moments that had brought her here. But as she thought about it more, she realized that her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to her community, and if sharing it could help someone else, then maybe it was worth the vulnerability. Claire and Charles were fully supportive when Lila shared her decision with them. They could see the change in her too, the way she was growing more comfortable in her own skin, finding strength in the very things that had once made her feel small. They agreed to attend the event and support her no matter what. The day of the community event, Lila stood backstage, feeling a mixture of nervousness and determination. Claire gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You've got this, honey. Just speak from the heart." Lila nodded, trying to steady her breathing. She had never been one for public speaking, never enjoyed the spotlight. But this wasn't about her. It was about the others who might be going through what she had. When it was finally her turn, she stepped up to the podium, her hands slightly trembling, but her heart strong. The crowd before her was a mixture of students, teachers, and parents, all there to listen and learn. Lila took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room until they settled on her parents, sitting together in the front row, smiling at her with pride. "Hi, I'm Lila," she began, her voice a little shaky at first. "I'm not really sure where to start. I guess I'm just like a lot of other kids, trying to figure out who I am and where I belong. But for a while, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. At school, it felt like I was always being judged, like I was never good enough." She paused, the words coming slowly but steadily. "I was bullied, told I didn't fit in, that I was different. And for a long time I believed it." Lila could feel the weight of the room's attention on her, but there was something freeing about it too. It wasn't a weight of judgment, it was a weight of understanding. She continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "But then something changed," she said, her eyes looking directly at the crowd. "I realized that I didn't have to hide. I didn't have to be quiet or shrink away from who I am. I have a family who loves me for me, and I have a voice. And I'm not going to let anyone take that away from me." She looked down at her hands for a moment, gathering the courage to continue. "I know that a lot of you out there might feel the way I felt, like you're not enough, like you don't matter. But you do. You matter more than you know. And I want you to know that it's okay to stand up for yourself, to speak out even when it's hard. Because you're not alone." Lila took a deep breath, her chest swelling with a sense of pride she had never known. "And if you ever feel like you don't belong, remember this. You have a place. You have a voice. You have people who will stand by you, no matter what." As she finished, the room was silent for a moment, but then the applause started, soft at first, then growing louder as more and more people stood to their feet. Lila could hardly believe what she was feeling. It wasn't just a moment of relief or accomplishment, it was a moment of true transformation. She had turned her pain into power, her hurt into hope. From that day on, Lila became a beacon of hope in her school and community. Her story, shared so openly and vulnerably, resonated with so many others. She was approached by other students who shared their own struggles with her, looking for guidance and comfort. Lila, once a quiet, reserved girl, had become someone others looked up to, someone who had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, more radiant than ever before. Claire and Charles watched with pride as Lila grew more confident in her role as a mentor and advocate. They knew that this was just the beginning of her journey. The girl who had once been unsure of her place in the world had found it. not just in her family, but in her community. And as Lila stood side by side with Claire and Charles, smiling at the crowd that had gathered to support her, she finally realized that she had always belonged. She was exactly where she was meant to be. As the weeks passed, the transformation within their home was palpable. The bond between Lila, Claire, and Charles grew stronger with every passing day. They had been through so much together, faced difficult moments, but they had emerged from them united and more resilient than ever. It started with small gestures. Lila, once so quiet and withdrawn, now sought out moments to spend with Claire and Charles. She would often join them in the kitchen, helping Claire with dinner preparations or sitting with Charles while he read his books. At first, it was a tentative step toward connection. Lila wasn't quite sure how to bridge the gap that had existed between them for so long. But as time went on, those moments became more frequent, more comfortable. She no longer felt like an outsider in her own home. One Saturday morning, Claire was preparing pancakes in the kitchen when Lila wandered in, her usual morning routine of retreating to her room now a thing of the past. Claire smiled as she turned to face her. "Morning, honey. Want to help?" Lila hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Sure." She rolled up her sleeves, her hands still a bit awkward as she tried to master the art of flipping pancakes. Claire guided her gently, showing her the right technique. "You've got it," Claire said with a smile, her voice full of warmth. "It's all about the timing." Lila smiled, trying again with a little more confidence, and this time the pancake landed perfectly on the plate. "Hey, not bad," Claire said, her eyes shining with pride. Lila's eyes softened, a rare, genuine smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The warmth between them was undeniable, and Claire felt a rush of gratitude for the moment they were sharing. It wasn't just about pancakes, it was about the simple act of being together, of nurturing the connection they had been building. Later that day, the family gathered around the table, sharing the breakfast they had made together. They laughed, joked, and talked about their week, something they had never really done before in this way. The air felt lighter, filled with an easy joy. Charles, who had often been the quiet observer in the past, seemed more present than ever. His gentle humor flowed freely, and he couldn't help but smile at Lila's growing comfort in the family dynamic. After breakfast, they decided to take a walk to the park, something they hadn't done in a long time. Lila, her hair caught by the wind, walked beside Claire and Charles, each step a symbol of how far they had come. The small moments of togetherness, like this walk, like the laughter over pancakes, had once been distant, out of reach. But now, they were the foundation of their family. As they strolled through the park, Lila spoke more freely than she had in the past. She asked Claire about her day at work, curious about the stories she often told. She shared some of her thoughts about her new friends at school and how she was beginning to feel more accepted, more like she belonged. Her voice, once soft and tentative, had taken on a new confidence, and Claire couldn't help but marvel at the strength Lila was showing. Charles, too, noticed the change. He had always been proud of Lila, but now he saw her as more than just the quiet girl he had initially brought into his home. She was growing into a young woman, one who was capable of overcoming incredible obstacles and finding her place in the world. It filled him with a sense of awe. Later that evening after dinner, they sat in the living room as they often did. This time, the atmosphere felt different, as if something unspoken had shifted between them. Lila, sitting between Claire and Charles, glanced up at both of them, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she began, her voice soft but clear, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. I'm really grateful for you both. For believing in me. I didn't think I had it in me to be the person I am now." Claire reached out, placing her hand gently over Lila's. "We always believed in you, Lila," she said. "We just needed to give you the time to see it for yourself." Charles nodded, his voice low and steady. "You've been stronger than you think. And we're proud of the way you've handled everything." For a moment, there was silence, comfortable, warm silence. Lila looked down at her hands, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never been this close to anyone, never felt this loved or accepted. She had thought she was alone in the world, that she would always be on the outside looking in. But here now, in this home, with Claire and Charles, she had found not just family but a sense of belonging. The next few weeks were filled with more of these moments: shared meals, walks in the park, late-night conversations. The bond between the three of them deepened with each passing day. Lila started to open up about her dreams, her hopes for the future. Claire and Charles listened attentively, offering their unwavering support. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Lila spoke again, this time her voice more determined. "I think I want to start playing music again. Not just for myself, but for others. Maybe even write songs." Claire's eyes lit up and Charles smiled. They had always known that music was a part of Lila, something deep within her that needed an outlet. And now, it seemed like she was finally ready to share that part of herself with the world. "We'll be right there with you, every step of the way," Claire said, her voice full of love and conviction. Charles nodded in agreement. "You've got a gift, Lila. And we're here to support you, whatever it takes." The three of them sat together that night, the warmth of their connection filling the space between them. Lila realized that the family they had become wasn't just about the love they shared. It was about the way they helped each other grow, the way they lifted each other up in times of need. They had been through their struggles, but now, as a family, they were stronger than ever. The challenges they had faced had brought them closer together, and in the process, they had created a bond that no one could ever break. The months that followed were filled with progress, as Lila blossomed into a young woman who believed in her potential. She began taking small steps toward realizing her dreams, reconnecting with her music, writing lyrics, and even performing at school events. The growth she experienced was remarkable, a quiet yet powerful transformation that stunned Claire and Charles. It all started with a school talent show, something Lila had once only dreamed of participating in. She had always loved music, but the thought of performing in front of others was terrifying. For years, she kept her talents to herself, too afraid of judgment, of failing in front of others. But something had changed in her over the past several months. With the support of Claire and Charles, she had come to understand that her worth wasn't determined by the opinions of others. One evening, Claire was sorting through the mail when she saw a letter addressed to Lila. It was an invitation to the annual talent show, a contest that every student at the high school was encouraged to participate in. Her heart swelled with pride as she read the words aloud. "Lila, you've been invited to perform at the talent show." Lila, who had been sitting on the couch reading, looked up in surprise. She had been talking about entering for weeks but hadn't expected an official invitation. "Really?" she asked, her voice a little uncertain. "Really," Claire replied with a smile, her heart bursting. "They want you to perform. This is your chance to show everyone what you can do." Lila looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say. She had come so far, but the idea of standing in front of an audience still made her nervous. What if they didn't like her music? What if they thought she wasn't good enough? Charles, who had been quietly observing the conversation, stood up and walked over to Lila. He knelt in front of her, his eyes filled with understanding. "You've got this, Lila," he said softly. "You've worked hard, and what you've got to share is worth sharing. No matter what happens, we're proud of you. This is your moment." Lila felt the weight of his words settle in her chest, and for the first time, she truly believed them. Maybe she wasn't perfect. Maybe she wasn't the most polished performer. But her music was real, and it mattered. That night, Lila practiced late into the evening, her fingers dancing across the strings of her guitar with a new sense of confidence. She had written a song specifically for this moment. A song about resilience, about overcoming fear, and about the love and support that had carried her through the darkest of times. The day of the talent show arrived, and Lila's nerves were palpable. Claire and Charles stood backstage with her, offering encouragement as the other students prepared to perform. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she held her guitar, but she wasn't alone. Her family was right there with her, a steady force of love and belief. When it was finally her turn, Lila walked to the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. The lights were bright, and the audience was a blur of faces, but she focused on the one thing that mattered, her music. She took a deep breath, strummed the first chord, and began to sing. The song flowed from her, the lyrics that had once seemed too personal, too vulnerable, now filling the space around her. Her voice wavered slightly at first, but then it steadied, and she found her rhythm. The audience, who had been chatting quietly at first, began to listen in silence, captivated by the raw emotion in her voice and the beauty of her song. Lila didn't care about the applause at the end. She didn't care about being perfect. All that mattered was that she was there, standing on that stage, doing something she had once thought was impossible. And when the song ended, when the last note faded into the air, there was a moment of silence, before the audience erupted into applause. Claire and Charles stood at the back, tears in their eyes. They had watched their daughter go from a quiet, uncertain girl to a young woman who stood confidently in the face of fear. Lila had just accomplished something extraordinary, and in doing so, she had proven not just to herself but to the world what she was capable of. After the performance, Lila was surrounded by her classmates, all offering their congratulations and praise. But she wasn't looking for validation anymore. The real victory had already happened. She had shared a piece of herself with the world, and in return she had received something far more important than applause, acceptance, and the quiet pride of knowing she had stepped into her own. The family gathered that night, sharing a celebratory dinner in their home. Lila sat between Claire and Charles, her eyes alight with a new sense of self-assurance. She had done it. She had taken a leap of faith, and it had paid off in a way she hadn't expected. "You were amazing," Claire said, reaching out to squeeze Lila's hand. Charles smiled, his voice full of pride. "We're so proud of you, Lila. You've come a long way." Lila smiled softly, her heart full. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." And in that moment, the truth of their journey together was clear. It wasn't just about the music or the talent show. It was about the love and support that had allowed Lila to find her voice, to overcome her fears, and to become the person she was meant to be. The family, once fragmented by uncertainty and doubt, was now stronger than ever. They had learned that true love and belonging weren't about perfection or outward accomplishments. It was about being there for each other, lifting each other up, and believing in each other when it was hardest to believe in oneself. As they sat together that night, their hearts full of love and pride, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, stronger, closer, and more united than ever before. As the evening settled into a quiet, peaceful rhythm, Claire and Charles sat together on the back porch, the soft hum of crickets filling the air. The sky had turned a deep shade of indigo, dotted with the first few stars of the night. The house was calm now, the day's bustle having faded away, and Lila, having just finished another round of guitar practice, had retreated to her room for some much-needed rest. Claire sipped her glass of wine, letting the cool night air wash over her. She looked over at Charles, who was gazing out at the yard, lost in thought. He had a faraway look in his eyes, one that came when he was reflecting on something important. Claire, too, felt the weight of the past few months settle on her shoulders. So much had changed, and yet, it felt like everything had been leading to this moment, the moment when their family truly felt whole. "I was thinking about how different things are now," Claire said softly, breaking the silence. Charles nodded, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "Yeah, me too. It's hard to believe it's only been a year since we brought her home." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. A year. It felt like both a lifetime and just a blink of an eye. When they first met Lila, she had been a shy, reserved girl who barely spoke, her walls so thick it seemed impossible to break through. She had been a mystery, an enigma that neither Claire nor Charles fully understood. But now, sitting in the quiet of the evening, the girl they had brought into their lives had become a young woman who was finding her voice, her passions, and her place in the world. Claire set her wine down on the table beside her, her fingers tracing the rim of the glass. "You know, I think about that day we met her, how nervous she was, how she barely looked at us. We were supposed to be helping her, giving her a home, but I think it's us who've been changed the most." Charles turned to look at her, a soft smile playing at the corner of his lips. "I feel the same way. When we decided to adopt, we thought we were giving her a chance. But I never expected how much she'd give us in return." It was true. At the time, they had been excited but apprehensive. They had no idea what they were getting into, no way of knowing how much their lives would be transformed by a quiet, talented, and resilient girl who had known more pain than they could have imagined. They had assumed they were the ones with wisdom to offer, But in reality, Lila had taught them just as much, if not more. I used to think we were pretty set in our ways, Claire continued, a wistful look in her eyes. You know, I thought we had our lives together, that everything was as it should be. But she's opened us up, Charles. She's made us see life in a new light, made us more patient, more understanding. I didn't know how much I could love someone until I loved her. Charles's voice softened, and for a moment he looked like he was seeing something beyond the present, lost in a memory of their early days together. I remember when we first brought her home. She was so quiet, so unsure. But little by little, we saw this side of her we never expected. She's made me realize that we've been taking so much for granted. How often did we get so caught up in our own lives that we forgot to see the little things? Lila's taught me how to appreciate the small moments. I think I'm a better person because of her. Claire nodded, her heart swelling with love. We've both grown. I've learned to listen more, to give her the space she needs, but also to be there when she needs us. I think she's changed our lives more than we've changed hers. Charles leaned back in his chair, exhaling a deep breath. I used to worry about whether we were doing the right thing. I wasn't sure if we could be the parents she needed. But now, I can't imagine our lives without her. She's not just our daughter now. She's part of us. Claire smiled, her heart full. I don't think we'll ever be the same again. And I'm so glad for that. We're not just a couple anymore, Charles. We're a family. A real family. I can see it now, how much she's brought us together. The night stretched on, and the stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if in celebration of this new chapter in their lives. The house behind them, once a place of quiet comfort, now felt like home in the truest sense. It was no longer just a structure of brick and wood. It was a place where love had taken root, where dreams were nurtured, and where they had found a new sense of purpose. We've come a long way, Claire said, her voice filled with gratitude. Charles smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. Yeah. And I think we're just getting started. In that moment, the future seemed full of endless possibilities. Whatever challenges they had faced, whatever struggles lay ahead, they knew that they had each other, and that, together, they could face anything. Lila had brought them closer, had shown them the depth of love they were capable of. And now, they were ready to embrace whatever came next as a family, stronger, deeper, and more united than ever before. As the family sat together, quietly enjoying their dinner, there was a sense of peace in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement of how far they had come, both as individuals and as a unit. The laughter of the past months, the growth of Lila from a shy, reserved girl to a confident young woman, filled the room with warmth. They had made it through challenges, faced their own fears, and learned invaluable lessons along the way. But as they finished their meal, something larger than the food they'd shared lingered in the room. It was a feeling that had been building slowly over time, growing with each small victory and every moment of support, understanding, and love they had shown one another. It was the realization that what had truly brought them together, what had turned a house into a home, wasn't just the formalities of family life or the milestones of adopting a child. It was love and compassion, the simple, powerful forces that transcend all barriers. Claire looked at Lila, who was quietly pushing her food around her plate, a content smile on her face. She had come so far from the quiet girl who had once sat in the corner of their home, unsure of her place. Lila had blossomed, not just in her talents but in her understanding of herself and the world around her. And Claire knew deep down that it wasn't just the structure of their family that had helped her grow. It was their unconditional love and the compassion they had shown her that made the difference. "There's something I've been thinking about a lot lately," Claire said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over the table. She looked around at her family, Charles, sitting across from her, with a thoughtful look on his face, and Lila, who met her gaze with a calm expression. "I think we often talk about family as if it's something that's defined by blood or the circumstances of our birth. But I've come to realize that it's really about the love you give, the compassion you show, and the understanding you offer. That's what makes a family." Lila's eyes softened at her words, and Charles nodded in agreement. "You're right. When we first met Lila, we didn't know what to expect. We thought we were just providing a safe home, giving her a second chance. But what we didn't realize was how much she would teach us about love, about patience, about the importance of seeing beyond someone's struggles and embracing them for who they truly are. Lila looked up at him, a quiet smile curling on her lips. It was the kind of smile that spoke volumes, one that conveyed gratitude and understanding. She had always known, deep down, that her story wasn't just about overcoming the adversity of her past. It was about the family that had chosen her, the family that had seen her not as a project or a problem, but as a person who deserved love, compassion, and support just as much as anyone else. Love doesn't come with conditions, Claire continued, her voice gentle but firm. We didn't ask Lila to change or become someone else. We just asked her to be herself. And that's all we ever wanted for her, to see that she was worthy of love, no matter what her past looked like. No matter what anyone else said. Lila looked at her, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. She had struggled with self-doubt for so long, but through Claire and Charles, she had learned the true meaning of unconditional love. They didn't love her for her accomplishments or her potential. They loved her simply for who she was as she was. And that was a gift she had never expected, a gift that had changed her life in ways she couldn't fully explain. Charles reached across the table, placing his hand over Lila's. What we've learned from you, Lila, he said, is that love and compassion have no boundaries. They don't care about race, background, or any of the labels society tries to put on us. Love transcends all of that. It's the most powerful force there is. And I think that's what's made us stronger as a family. We've learned to see each other through the eyes of compassion, to listen without judgment, and to support one another no matter what. Lila squeezed his hand, feeling the depth of his words. She had come into their lives feeling like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong. But over time, with their patience and kindness, she had found her place. Their love had broken down the walls she had built around herself, walls that had kept her from believing she was worthy of the same care and affection that everyone else seemed to receive so easily. That's the real lesson, isn't it? Claire said, her voice tinged with emotion. Love doesn't ask for perfection. It doesn't demand anything in return. It's simply there, always ready to heal and uplift. And when you embrace love and compassion, you start to see the world differently. You start to see people for who they are, not what they've been through or the mistakes they've made. Lila nodded, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. She had learned that lesson well. The world had tried to label her, to define her by the circumstances of her birth, the things she had no control over. But in this family, she was seen as more than her past. She was seen as a person, deserving of the same love and opportunities as anyone else. In that moment, Lila realized that the greatest gift her family had given her wasn't just a roof over her head or material support. It was the gift of unconditional love and compassion. And that, she knew, was what would carry her forward into the future, no matter where life took her. As the evening drew to a close, the family sat together in peaceful silence, each of them reflecting on the journey they had been on. They had learned that love was not just something you gave, it was something that had the power to transform, to heal, and to unite. It was a lesson that transcended all barriers, a lesson that would stay with them forever. And in that quiet moment, they all understood, love, true love, was the force that had brought them together, and it would always be the force that kept them strong, no matter what challenges lay ahead. If Lila's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Epic Story Moments for more inspiring stories about love, family, and the power of compassion. Drop a comment below to tell us how you think unconditional love can change lives. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter to life.